with our radio show.
Jerry, it's tradition on our show to start off the interview getting to know our guests' beginnings. So where did you grow up and what got you started, or better yet, what sparked your interest that got you into writing?
I was actually born and raised in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and then as a young teenager moved to Illinois, where my father was a police chief in a suburban department. And I was an athlete in high school and hoped to be a big league baseball player like a lot of kids do, but I got hurt playing football, and to stay close to the sports scene, I started sports writing for a local paper and covering sports. And it was actually before I was old enough to drive, so my parents had to drive me to the ball games and drive me to the newspaper office, but I was actually a professional writer by the time I was 14 years old.
Wow.
And I really never looked back. I just, I wasn't good yet, but I realized I'd found my niche, and I've been a writer ever since.
You know, has the idea of adding Christian themes into your works been with you since the beginning?
It really has. I thought I would be a sports writer, but I was a Christian, and it wasn't too long after that I felt called to full-time Christian work, and I thought that meant I might have to give up the writing and become a pastor or a missionary, and I didn't really feel called or gifted in those areas. But it was really gratifying for me to realize that sometimes when God calls you, He's already gifted you, and it was gratifying to realize that I could use my writing to answer that call.
You know, I ask musicians a lot on our show this question. What do you consider your first big break was as far as getting, into the mix of the world of writing novels?
Well, probably even before writing novels, I think the biggest break I had was my fourth book was actually a book that I wrote with Hank Aaron. I got a chance to interview him and do a book with him right when he was on the cusp of breaking the home run record, and that just opened so many doors for me to write first-person as-told-to autobiographies of people like Walter Payton and Orville Hershiser, Nolan Ryan, big stars like that. And then I started writing fiction after I'd written maybe 17 or 18 nonfiction books, and I really enjoyed that. I mean, I sort of wrote the nonfiction books to put food on the table, and wrote the fiction because I loved doing it. And to keep writing fiction, you kind of have to have a hit, and that, of course, that came with the Left Behind series. And then once you can write whatever you want, I kind of lean almost exclusively on the fiction now.
Has success changed you in any way?
Well, it's probably something that should be asked other people. I'd like to think it hasn't. I think the highest compliment I was ever paid was I spoke at a writers' conference one time that I'd been speaking at for years, from before I had the big success until afterward, and the director introduced me, and he said he'd been hearing from people during the week that they knew me when, and he said, I like to say if you knew him then, you know him now. And that really, really moved me, because I'd like to think that I know who I am and who I'm not, and where the glory belongs.
Yeah. Are you recognized out in public, or is that different for authors other than, actors or musicians?
It's a little different. I wouldn't say I'm a household name, and for me, I get recognized just enough to make it fun, and not so much that it's a nuisance. I used to think it would be fun to be immediately recognized wherever you go, but once I started working with big time athletes and evangelists and people like that that were known as soon as they're seen outside the house, I realized that that's a kind of a prison in itself. They literally can't go anywhere and have any time to themselves. Everybody wants a piece of them, so I don't think I'd want that kind of attention.
I want to ask you one question about your Left Behind series. When it comes to the films, did they do the books justice, in your opinion?
No, we weren't really happy with the movies, but they're making a remake now that stars Nicolas Cage, and I'm pretty optimistic about how that's going to go. I think he's a good actor, and I think they're going to do a good job with this one with a bigger budget. So I'm hoping that'll bring new life to the franchise and to the interest in the subject, and maybe even to the book series.
Did you have any hand in the filmmaking of the original movies?
No, once you sell the rights, you pretty much give up creative control there.
All right. Well, let's talk about your book you got coming out. I think it's next week, right? I Saul?
Yeah, that comes out on August 27th, and it's really two novels in one. It's biblical fiction because it's based on the life of Paul. That's why I call it I, Saul. Paul, often when he wrote his letters in the New Testament, he would begin by saying, I, Paul, a servant of Christ. And so I speculate that if they found his memoirs, his personal memoirs, he might have started writing them with I, comma, Saul, and just would tell his own history. And I base that history on what we know of him from Scripture, that he was raised in Tarsus, that he was a Roman citizen, that he had a lot of Greek influence, that he studied under Gamaliel, things like that, and then just fleshed that out. What kind of family would he have had? But every other chapter is really modern day, and it's sort of Da Vinci Code meets the Rogue, because I've got a modern day character who's discovered his memoirs, and there's a caper where a lot of nefarious interests are after these priceless parchments, and they have their own interest in making a lot of money on them. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a fun read, and I learned a lot in the research, and so I think people are going to like this.
Well, what inspired you to write a novel about Saul?
Well, I really love the character. I mean, I think he's one of the great heroes of the faith, and I love his genius with words. Some of the great phrasing of the New Testament. When you read phrases like, I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. Those were thrilling words, and every time I would come across a passage that he'd write like that, it was more than just scholarship that I was using in a literary sense. It was devotional for me.
Oh, they're powerful. They're powerful words.
Yeah, it's just fantastic stuff. When he writes, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, I mean, it just makes you want to rise up out of your chair and shake your fist in the sky. So it's, he's a great character to write about.
Tell us about your relationship with Dr. James S. McDonald. What role did he play in the writing of the book?
Well, he didn't do any of the writing, but he's a great theologian and scholar and a great preacher. He's pastor of the mega church in Chicago, the Harvest Bible Chapel. They've got about 13,000 people that go there on 7 different campuses. But he's an old friend, and I've heard him preach on Paul and Peter and a lot of the New Testament, and I had access to his incredible mind and also to all of his research on sermons on Paul. And to just have access to that stuff was a great treasure, and it really informed the writing of the novel.
Well, what did you learn about yourself while writing this book and about Paul?
Well, I learned that I'm not the writer I thought I was, because I'm comparing myself with a guy whose writings have held up over 2 millennia. I mean, yeah. I think I'll long be forgotten by the time 2,000 more years.
Well, you have sold 70 million copies, but I think Paul sold a little bit more.
Yeah, I think he sold a little bit more, and his have lasted a lot more time. Yeah. But you learn a lot about yourself spiritually when you write stuff like this too. But I learned an awful lot about Paul. I mean, it was fun to just kind of dig into to his history and to follow the chronology of all the events of his life and all the persecution he went through, what he gave up to devote his entire life to preaching the gospel. It's just inspiring and thrilling.
Well, tell us a little bit about the main character, Dr. Augie Knox.
Yeah, I had met this professor from a seminary who gets pulled into this story. He's got a friend who's a tour guide in Holy Land, and one of his friends has discovered the original memoirs of St. Paul, which, as you can imagine, would be just a priceless treasure that would be worth just untold millions, maybe $1 billion. And so many people want to cut it up and move it on the black market and make all kinds of money from it. And people's lives are at stake trying to find these and protect them and keep them out of the hands of antiquities thieves. And so Augie is really trying to protect the life of his friend and protect these documents and figure out what they're worth. And so there's a love story, and there's a chase, and governments involved, international intrigue. And then every other chapter, we're back to the 1st century, where Paul has been sentenced to death and is awaiting execution in a dungeon in Rome. He's being visited by Luke. He's trying to finish his memoirs and hide them from the authorities because he's naming names, and he doesn't want other people to be sentenced to death just because he's told that they're also Christians and living for the faith. So there's a lot of fun and a lot of jumping back and forth timelines.
Yeah, was it challenging jumping back and forth between 1st century Rome and present-day Texas?
It really was, but I kind of enjoyed it because if you ever get bogged down, you just switched 2,000 years. So it's a whole different kind of writing.
What do you think, or what do you believe is the hallmark of your writing?
Well, I like to be very spare and not try to use a lot of fancy words. I want to omit needless words. I want the reader to fall in love with the characters and keep reading, keep turning the pages. But I also want them to have an arc just like the character does. A character should grow from the start of the book to the end, and I want the reader to grow as well. I sure did when I was writing this, by researching it and going through it. I feel like I grew spiritually, and I want the reader to have that same experience and really grow in their own spiritual life.
Well, what inspires you to keep going? How do you keep coming up with new ideas? You have written like how many books now?
This is my 181st, and so I feel called to write, and I don't want to sound falsely modest, but I write. I'm still writing because I feel like it's the only gift I've been given. I don't sing or dance or preach. This is all I do. So I feel obligated to exercise that gift, and so that's why I keep going and keep doing it.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about social media or websites where people can go to purchase this book, or maybe even learn more about you and your writings?
Well, they can go to jerry-jenkins.com to learn about me, and really, if they just Google Saul, S-A-U-L, it's going to be everywhere. Releases August 27, and you can get it in any format, audio or ebook or hard copy, at any outlet, Christian bookstores, secular bookstores, online, anywhere. So we hope that it's going to have quite a launch next week, and looking forward to a lot of people seeing it. Well,
Jerry, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, you have a nice night, sir.
You too, thanks.
Bye-bye.
The 25th Hour Radio Show.